Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we are bringing you 7 of the most disturbing true Cornfield horror stories ever documented. Tales that will forever change how you view those endless golden rows that stretch across America's heartland. These are not works of fiction, but genuine accounts from real people who experienced terror in places most of us consider peaceful and pastoral. Each story has been meticulously verified through witness statements, police reports, and corroborating evidence that confirms these nightmares actually happened. Cornfields are not just crops waiting for harvest. They are isolated labyrinths where anything can hide, where screams go unheard, and where the line between civilization and something far darker becomes dangerously thin. If you crave authentic horror content that does not rely on jump scares, but instead on the chilling reality of what human beings have actually survived, subscribe to Buried Files and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into true terror. After you hear these 7 accounts, we want you to share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us if you have ever felt that primal fear when standing at the edge of a cornfield at dusk. Now prepare yourself as we venture into the stalks where nightmares grow alongside the harvest. I was 17 when I found out someone had been living in my grandmother's cornfield, watching our family for months. What started as a peaceful summer job turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. And it taught me that the greatest horrors are not supernatural. They are human. My name is Oscar, and 3 years ago I agreed to spend the summer at my grandmother's farm in rural Iowa to help with the seasonal work. She owned 200 acres of prime farmland, with the main house sitting on a small hill surrounded by what seemed like endless rows of corn. The property had been in our family for 4 generations, and my grandmother, despite being in her 70s, still insisted on managing most of the operations herself. She needed help that summer because my uncle, who usually assisted her, had taken a job out of state. I was between high school and college, had no solid plans, and honestly thought it would be a peaceful few months of simple labor and good home cooking. I was naive. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I expected. I woke up at dawn, helped with equipment maintenance, drove the tractor through the fields checking irrigation lines, and spent my evenings on the porch with my grandmother, listening to her stories about the old days. The cornfield was beautiful in an overwhelming way. When you stood at the edge and looked out, all you could see were endless green stalks swaying in the breeze, stretching to the horizon in perfect rows. The corn was already chest high by early June, and my grandmother said it would reach well over 7 feet by harvest time in September. I found the repetitive nature of the work calming, and the isolation of the farm felt like a vacation from the chaos of suburban life I was used to back home. Everything changed on a Wednesday evening in my 3rd week there. I was walking back from checking the irrigation system on the south 40 acres, following the maintenance road that cut through the middle of the field. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows between the rows, and I was thinking about the dinner my grandmother was probably already preparing. That is when I noticed something odd. There were boot prints in the soft mud near one of the irrigation valves, clear as day. And they were not mine. They were not my grandmother's either. Hers were small, and these were at least a size 11 or 12, deep impressions from someone heavy. I wore a size 9, and my prints looked completely different. I stood there staring at those prints for a solid minute, trying to rationalize them. Maybe a utility worker had come by to check something. Maybe one of the neighbors had cut through our property. But something felt wrong. The prints were fresh, probably from that same day, and they led away from the road, deeper into the corn rows where there was no reason for anyone to go. I followed them for maybe 20 feet before they disappeared into the dense stalks. And I decided I did not want to go any farther as the light was fading. I told myself I would mention it to my grandmother at dinner. When I brought it up that evening, She frowned and said she had not authorized any workers to come by, and none of the neighbors would cut through the field without asking first. She seemed concerned, but not alarmed, and she suggested it might have been someone lost or confused who wandered onto the property. It happened occasionally, she said, especially during summer when tourists got turned around on the rural roads. She told me not to worry about it, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Unease, maybe? That night I had trouble sleeping. My bedroom window faced the cornfield, and I kept imagining I saw movement between the rows, though I knew it was probably just the wind. The next day I was more alert, more watchful. I found myself scanning the field constantly as I worked, looking for anything out of place. And I found things. Small things that could have been coincidence, but started to form a pattern. A section of corn near the old equipment barn was disturbed. Stalks bent at odd angles, as if something had pushed through them instead of walking between the rows. An empty tin can near the fence line, rusted but not ancient, sitting in the grass where it had no business being. Most disturbing was the feeling I got around sunset. Every evening when I was finishing up the day's work, I felt like I was being watched. It was a primal sensation, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up and your peripheral vision go into overdrive. I did not say anything to my grandmother about these observations because I did not want to worry her, and part of me thought I was being paranoid. But on Saturday of that week, I decided to investigate on my own. I told my grandmother I was going to walk the fence line to check for damage, which was a normal maintenance task. But really, I planned to go deeper into the field and see if I could find any explanation for the strange signs I had been noticing. I brought a heavy flashlight, my phone fully charged, and a pocket knife that I told myself was just a tool, but knew was really for protection. I entered the field from the east side around 4 in the afternoon, giving myself plenty of daylight. The corn was dense, and once you were more than a few rows in, the world became nothing but green walls and rustling leaves. I walked carefully, following the irrigation ditches that ran through the property, looking for anything unusual. For the first 30 minutes, I found nothing. Then, about a quarter mile from the house, deep in a section we had not irrigated yet that week, I found it. Someone had created a living space in the corn. There was a flattened area about 8 feet by 10 feet where the stalks had been carefully bent down to create a floor. A dirty sleeping bag was rolled up against one side. Empty food containers were stacked neatly in a pile, the kind of non-perishable items you could buy at any gas station. Protein bar wrappers, beef jerky packages, crushed water bottles. There was a small camping stove, the portable kind that runs on propane canisters. And most chilling of all, there was a pair of binoculars hanging from one of the corn stalks. The lenses pointed in the direction of my grandmother's house. My hand started shaking. This was not some confused tourist. This was not some neighbor cutting through. Someone had been living here, in our field, probably for weeks based on the amount of trash. Someone had been watching us, watching my grandmother, watching me. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but I had no signal that deep in the field. I took several photos of the campsite, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then I got out of there as fast as I could without running. Running would make noise. Running would let whoever this was know that I had found their hiding spot. I made it back to the house and immediately told my grandmother everything. She went pale but stayed calm, the way people from her generation do in a crisis. She called the police, and 2 deputies arrived within 20 minutes. I led them back to the spot, my grandmother insisting on coming along despite the deputies suggesting she stay at the house. When we got there, the sleeping bag was gone. The stove was gone. The binoculars were gone. Only the trash remained, and even some of that had been removed. Whoever it was had been there recently, maybe watching me find their camp, and had cleared out the moment we left. The deputies took the remaining trash as evidence and searched the immediate area, but found nothing else. They told us they would increase patrols on our road and advised us to keep all doors and windows locked at night. They said it was probably just a transient passing through, that it happened sometimes in rural areas, and that the person was most likely long gone now that they knew they had been discovered. My grandmother nodded and thanked them, but I could see she did not believe it any more than I did. That night we both slept with our bedroom doors locked, and I kept the heaviest wrench from the tool shed next to my bed. For 3 days nothing happened. No signs, no disturbances, no feeling of being watched. I started to think maybe the deputies were right. Maybe whoever it was had moved on. Then on Tuesday evening, as I was finishing up work around 7:30, I found a note stuck to the windshield of the tractor with a piece of tape. It was written on a torn piece of cardboard in black marker, all capital letters. "Stop looking." The dread that hit me was like ice water in my veins. This person was still here, still watching, still on the property somewhere in those 200 acres of corn that provided infinite hiding places. I drove the tractor back to the barn faster than I should have, grabbed the note carefully by the edges, and brought it into the house. My grandmother called the police again. Different deputies came this time, took the note, asked questions, searched the perimeter of the property with flashlights as darkness fell. They found boot prints near the barn that matched the size of the ones I had seen weeks earlier. They told us this was now being treated as stalking and trespassing, that they would have someone drive by every few hours, and that we should not hesitate to call 911 if we saw or heard anything suspicious. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jolt awake. The house settling, the wind in the corn, a bird calling in the darkness. I kept thinking about those binoculars pointed at the house. How long had this person been watching? What had they seen? What did they want? The questions cycled through my mind until dawn finally came, and I gave up on sleep entirely. My grandmother suggested I call my parents and go home, that she could hire someone local to finish the summer work. But I refused. I was not going to leave her alone on this property with some creep lurking in the fields. Instead, I called my friend Marcus, who lived 2 towns over, and asked him to come spend a few days with us. Marcus was a football player, built like a truck, and having another person around made me feel slightly less vulnerable. He arrived that afternoon with his own sleeping bag and a baseball bat, treating the whole thing like an adventure, though I could tell he was taking it seriously when he saw how rattled I was. That evening, Marcus and I decided we would take turns staying up through the night to keep watch. We sat on the porch with the outside lights on, watching the edge of the cornfield that started just 40 yards from the house. My grandmother had gone to bed around 10, and Marcus and I played cards and talked quietly, listening. Around 11:30, we both heard it. Movement in the corn, not the random rustling of wind, but deliberate rhythmic sounds. Something moving through the stalks parallel to the house. Marcus grabbed the baseball bat. I grabbed the flashlight and my phone with 911 already dialed, my thumb hovering over the call button. We stood at the edge of the porch, aiming the flashlight toward the sounds. For a moment, everything went silent. Then we saw him, just for a second, between the rows, maybe 30 feet away. A figure, tall, wearing dark clothes, standing completely still facing the house, facing us. I hit the call button. Marcus yelled something. I do not even remember what. The figure turned and disappeared deeper into the corn, moving fast. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 4 deputies this time, taking it seriously now. They searched with floodlights and a tracking dog they had brought. 2 hours later, they found another campsite. This one even deeper in the field on the northern boundary of the property. This one had more personal items. A backpack with clothing, a wallet with an ID. That is how we learned his name was Richard Paulman, age 43, with the last known address in Nebraska. That is also how we learned he had a criminal record. Multiple counts of stalking, one charge of attempted breaking and entering. He had been released from prison 8 months earlier. The police took it very seriously after that. They brought in additional officers and spent the entire next day searching every inch of those 200 acres. They never found him. He was gone, vanished like he had never been there, though his belongings proved he had been living in our field for at least a month, possibly longer. The police theorized he had been watching the property, learning the patterns, maybe planning to break into the house when he felt ready. They said we were lucky I had found that first campsite when I did, because it escalated their response before he could act on whatever he was planning. Richard Paulman was never caught. A warrant was issued. His information was entered into every database, but he disappeared. For all I know, he is still out there somewhere, living in someone else's field, watching someone else's family. That thought keeps me awake sometimes, even now, 3 years later. I finished the summer at my grandmother's farm because I refused to let fear drive me away. But I was never comfortable again. Every time I went into that cornfield to work, my heart rate would spike. Every sound made me turn around. Every evening I felt eyes on me, even though I knew rationally he was probably hundreds of miles away. My grandmother sold the farm the following spring. She said it was time to retire, that she was getting too old for the work anyway. But I know the real reason. That man took away her sense of safety in the place she had lived for 50 years. The new owners harvested the corn, plowed the fields, and eventually subdivided the property for development. Houses stand there now, suburban homes with neat lawns and swing sets. I wonder if those families have any idea what happened in that field. I wonder if they would care. To this day, I cannot walk through tall corn without my heart racing. The rational part of my brain knows that what happened was a statistical anomaly, that millions of people work in cornfields every year without incident. But the primal part, the part that remembers finding that campsite and seeing those binoculars pointed at my home, that part knows the truth. Cornfields are not just crops. They are perfect hiding places. And sometimes something is hiding there, watching, waiting. You just have to hope you never find out what it wants. I need to start by saying that I am not someone who believed in ghosts or the paranormal before this happened. I was a skeptic, the kind of person who rolled her eyes at ghost hunting shows and thought every unexplained sound had a logical explanation. That confidence is gone now. What I experienced in the cornfield behind my uncle's farm was real, and 3 years later, I still cannot explain it. My name is Evelyn, and I learned the hard way that some places hold on to things that should have been buried and forgotten. In August of 2022, my uncle David passed away suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 68. He had never married and had no children, so his 240-acre farm in central Nebraska passed to my mother, his only sibling. My mother had no interest in farming and lived 800 miles away in Denver. So the plan was to sell the property as quickly as possible. She asked me if I would be willing to spend a few months living at the farmhouse, getting it ready for sale, managing the final harvest with the help of local contractors, and basically serving as the family representative during the transition. I had just finished my master's degree and was between jobs, so I agreed. It seemed like a good opportunity to have some quiet time to figure out my next career move. And my uncle had always been kind to me during the few times we had visited when I was younger. I arrived at the farm on a humid Tuesday afternoon in early September. The house was a classic 2-story farmhouse that had been built in the 1920s, white clapboard with green shutters and a wraparound porch. It needed work, but was structurally sound. The cornfield stretched behind the house, row after row of tall green stalks that reached well over my head. ready for harvest in another few weeks. My first week was spent cleaning the house, sorting through my uncle's belongings, and meeting with the agricultural contractor who would handle the harvest. Everything was straightforward and exactly what I expected. On my 8th night there, I woke up to the sound of a child crying. It was faint but distinct, coming from outside. I checked my phone and saw it was 12:17 in the morning. My first thought was that a neighbor's child was lost or hurt, though I knew the nearest house was over a mile away. I got out of bed, went to the window, and looked out at the backyard and the cornfield beyond. The crying continued. A little girl by the sound of it, sobbing with that gulping, breathless quality children have when they are truly upset. The sound was coming from the cornfield. I did not even hesitate. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight, pulled on shoes, and went outside in my pajamas and a sweatshirt. The September night was cool, and fog was beginning to form in the low areas of the property. I stood at the edge of the cornfield, sweeping my phone's flashlight beam across the first few rows and called out, asking if anyone was there. The crying stopped for a moment, then started again, deeper in the field. I followed it. Walking into a cornfield at night is disorienting. The rows all look identical, and once you are more than 10 or 15 feet in, you lose sight of any landmarks. The corn walls close around you, blocking out the moonlight, and your world shrinks to the narrow corridor between the stalks. I kept my phone light aimed forward and followed the sound of the crying, which seemed to move away from me as I walked. I called out several more times, identifying myself, saying I was here to help, asking the child to stay where she was. The crying would pause when I spoke, then resume, always just ahead of me. I followed that sound for what felt like 20 minutes. Later, when I checked the timestamp on my phone, I realized it had been closer to 45 minutes. I was deep in the field, completely turned around with no clear idea which direction the house was, when the crying suddenly stopped. Just cut off in the middle of a sob. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insects, no rustling corn. Just crushing, oppressive silence that made my ears ring. That is when the fear hit me. I realized I was alone in the middle of a dark cornfield in the middle of the night, and I had no idea how to get back. I tried to retrace my steps, but quickly realized I had made too many turns following the sound. I used my phone's compass app to head generally west toward where I thought the house should be, pushing through rows and trying not to panic. It took me nearly an hour to find my way out. And when I finally emerged, I was on the far eastern edge of the property, over half a mile from the house. I was scratched up, exhausted, and thoroughly shaken. I walked back along the road, and when I got inside, I locked every door and window and did not sleep the rest of that night. The next morning in the daylight, I convinced myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe I had heard an animal. Foxes can make sounds that are eerily similar to human crying. Maybe I had been half asleep and disoriented. Maybe my grief over my uncle's death had manifested in some strange way. I told myself I would not go into that field at night again, and that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time I woke to the sound of an elderly woman calling my name. Not yelling, but calling in that gentle way someone might call a child to dinner. "Evelyn, honey, come here. Evelyn, I need you." The voice was coming from the cornfield. I stayed in bed this time, covers pulled up to my chin, listening to that voice call my name over and over for nearly 20 minutes before it finally stopped. I did not sleep the rest of that night either. The following night, a teenage boy's voice called from the field, shouting for help. The night after that, I heard my mother's voice, which was impossible because I had spoken to her on the phone that very evening, and she was in Colorado. Every night brought a different voice, always around midnight, always coming from the cornfield. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night. I was exhausted and on edge, and I started researching the property's history. What I found made everything worse. The farm had been in operation since 1873, established by homesteaders after the Homestead Act. But before that, the land had been part of a pioneer trail. And before that, it had been used by native peoples for generations. In 1876, a family of settlers who had made camp near what was now the cornfield were killed by what the historical records called unknown assailants. 7 people, including 3 children. In 1912, a field worker died of heat stroke and his body was not found for 3 days, having fallen between the corn rows. In 1948, a young woman disappeared from a neighboring farm, and her remains were found in the cornfield 5 months later. The police never determined if it was foul play or if she had gotten lost and succumbed to exposure. I found references to the voices going back to at least the 1960s. A local historian had collected oral histories from longtime residents, and several of them mentioned hearing calls from the cornfield at night. They described the same experience I was having. Voices of people they knew, voices of children, voices that led you deeper into the field and then vanished. At least 2 people had gotten lost following the voices and had to be rescued the next morning. No one could explain it. The local folklore said the field was built over an old burial ground, though I could not find any documentation to confirm that. I should have left. I should have packed my things and gone back to Denver and told my mother to hire someone local to handle the farm. But I was stubborn, and I told myself I was not going to be driven away by what was probably just audio pareidolia and my overactive imagination working on local superstition. So I stayed, and then I saw it. It was a Friday night, 2 weeks after the voices had started. I was sitting on the porch around 9 in the evening, drinking tea and trying to calm my nerves before bed, when I heard my father's voice. My father, who had died 6 years earlier from cancer, his voice calling from the cornfield, saying my name exactly the way he used to. "Evelyn Rose, come help your old man with something." That was his phrase. "Come help your old man." I stood up, hands shaking, and walked to the edge of the porch. I was not going to follow it into the field. I had learned that lesson. But I wanted to see if I could determine where the sound was coming from. I stood there watching the darkening cornfield, and that is when I saw movement. Something was moving through the corn about 30 yards out, pushing stalks aside as it walked parallel to the house. But the way it moved was wrong. It was too tall, taller than the corn, which was over 7 feet high. And the shape was wrong. The silhouette was elongated and thin, not matching any human proportions I recognized. I watched it move from right to left across my field of vision, always staying deep enough in the corn that I could not see it clearly, just the movement of the stalks being pushed aside. My father's voice kept calling my name, but now I could see the voice was not coming from where the thing was moving. The voice was some kind of lure, and whatever that thing was in the corn was what was making it. I went inside, locked the doors, and sat in the living room with every light on until dawn. The next day, I called a local pastor whose number I found in my uncle's address book. I explained what was happening, expecting him to think I was crazy. Instead, he sighed and said he had heard similar stories about that property for years. He offered to come and bless the house, which he did. But he told me honestly that he did not think it would help. The field itself was the problem, he said, and had been for longer than anyone could remember. Some places hold on to pain and tragedy, he told me, and they play it back like a recording. He suggested I have the corn harvested as soon as possible and considers selling the property to someone who would put it to a different use. I took his advice. I called the agricultural contractor and told him I wanted the harvest moved up immediately, that I would pay extra to make it a priority. He agreed, and 4 days later, his crew arrived with their equipment. Watching them harvest that corn felt like watching something be exercised. The combines moved through the field in methodical lines, cutting everything down, and with each pass, I felt a weight lifting. The work took 2 full days. By the end, the cornfield was nothing but stubble. And that night, for the first time in 3 weeks, I heard nothing. No voices, no calling, just silence. I stayed for another month to finish getting the house ready for sale. Without the corn, the property felt different, normal. I slept through the night. Birds came back to the yard. It was like whatever had been there was finally gone, or at least dormant. My mother sold the farm in November to a developer who planned to subdivide it for residential housing. The cornfield is gone permanently now, replaced with roads and building lots. I moved back to Denver and started a new job in January. I told myself I was fine, that I had gotten through a difficult experience and come out the other side. But I still cannot drive past a cornfield without feeling a tightness in my chest. And sometimes, late at night when I'm falling asleep, I hear my father's voice calling my name from very far away. I know it is not real. I know he is gone and at peace. But some part of me wonders if I brought something back with me from that field. Some small echo of whatever was calling out there in the dark. I try not to think about it too much. I try to focus on the fact that I got out, that I survived. But the truth is, I will never be completely sure I left everything behind in that cornfield in Nebraska. Some things follow you, whether you can see them or not. My car broke down on Route 34 at 11:45 on a Tuesday night. And what happened in the next 2 hours taught me that the most dangerous predators are the ones who know how to hunt in darkness. This is the story of how I barely escaped with my life. My name is Nathan, and 5 years ago, I was 26 years old, driving cross-country from Colorado to Pennsylvania for a new job. I had been on the road for 2 days, trying to save money by driving straight through instead of paying for hotels. It was a stupid decision motivated by financial stress and overconfidence in my 10-year-old sedan. I was somewhere in rural Nebraska, a stretch of 2-lane highway that cut through endless farmland, when my engine started making a sound like marbles in a blender. Within 30 seconds, the check engine light came on. The temperature gauge spiked into the red, and I barely managed to pull onto the shoulder before the whole thing died. I sat there in the sudden silence, my hazard lights blinking weakly, and assessed my situation. It was nearly midnight. I had not seen another car in over 20 minutes. My phone showed 1 bar of signal that kept flickering to no service. The last town I had passed was at least 15 miles back. On both sides of the road, cornfields stretched into the darkness, the stalks tall enough that I could not see past them. The corn was late-season growth, probably ready for harvest in a few weeks, standing at least 8 or 9 feet tall and forming solid walls that blocked any view of what might lie beyond. I tried calling for a tow truck, but the call kept dropping. I tried texting my brother to let him know where I was, but the message would not send. After 20 minutes of attempting to get help with no success, I made the decision to walk. I remembered seeing a farmhouse light maybe 2 or 3 miles back. If I walked at a decent pace, I could reach it in 40 minutes, use their phone, and get help. Sitting in a dead car on a dark highway, waiting for someone to come along seemed more dangerous than walking. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and a flashlight from the glove box, locked the car, and started walking back the way I had come. The road was completely dark, except for my flashlight beam. No streetlights, no house lights visible anywhere. Just my small circle of illumination and the vast darkness beyond it. The corn rustled in the night breeze, a sound that should have been peaceful, but instead felt menacing in the isolation. I walked on the shoulder, my flashlight pointed ahead, trying to remember exactly how far back that farmhouse had been. Had it been 2 miles or 4? In a car, distances are deceptive. I had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I saw headlights approaching from behind me. Relief flooded through me. I turned and waved my flashlight, flagging down the vehicle. It was a pickup truck, dark-colored, moving slowly. But instead of stopping when it reached me, it passed by at maybe 5 miles per hour, the driver's face hidden in shadow. I called out to it, waving, but it just continued down the road for another 100 feet. Then the brake lights came on. The truck stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The truck just sat there, brake lights glowing red in the darkness. Then the reverse lights came on and it started backing up toward me. Something about the way it moved, slow and deliberate, made my stomach clench. This was not someone being helpful. This was something else. I did not wait to find out what. I turned and ran into the cornfield. I crashed through the first few rows of corn, stalks slapping my face and arms, my flashlight beam jerking wildly. Behind me, I heard the truck stop on the road, heard doors opening, heard voices. Male voices, at least 2 of them, maybe 3. One of them laughed. That laugh made my blood freeze. It was not the laugh of someone trying to help a stranded motorist. It was the laugh of someone who enjoyed watching prey run. I kept moving through the corn, trying to run between the rows instead of crashing through them, trying to move fast while staying quiet. The rows were planted in long, straight lines, which meant if I stayed in one row, they could see my flashlight beam from far away. I turned off the flashlight and relied on moonlight, which was almost non-existent under the canopy of corn leaves. I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. I tripped over the uneven dirt, caught myself, kept moving. Behind me, I could hear them entering the field. At least 2, maybe 3 people, not trying to be quiet, talking to each other in normal voices, like they were on a casual walk. That was almost worse than if they had been chasing me aggressively. The casualness of it suggested they knew something I did not. Maybe that the field was surrounded by road on all sides and I had nowhere to go. Maybe that they had done this before. I moved as quietly as I could, changing directions every few rows, trying to get deeper into the field. My heart was slamming in my chest so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear them spreading out, moving through different rows, searching in a grid pattern. One of them was getting closer to me. I crouched down, pressing myself against the corn stalks, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps came within maybe 20 feet of me, stopped, then moved in a different direction. I stayed frozen for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 2 or 3. When I could no longer hear them in my immediate vicinity, I started moving again, crawling on my hands and knees to stay below the corn line. My phone was in my pocket, but I did not dare turn it on for fear the screen light would give away my position. I kept moving in what I hoped was a direction away from the road, deeper into the field. Then I heard something that made me stop breathing entirely. An engine, not the truck engine. Something else. Something mechanical and closer. Raised my head just enough to see over the corn and spotted a light moving through the field. They had driven the truck off the road and into the corn, driving down between the rows with spotlights, searching for me. I could see the lights sweeping back and forth maybe 100 yards away. I ran. I did not care about noise anymore. I crashed through the corn in pure panic, running perpendicular to the truck's path, trying to get distance before those lights found me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. And then I saw it. A driveway. A gap in the corn that led to a gravel driveway that led to a dark farmhouse. I sprinted toward it, my legs finding energy I did not know I had left. The truck's engine sound changed pitch. They had seen me. The lights were turning in my direction. I ran down the driveway and threw myself behind a metal storage shed next to the dark house, pressing myself against the corrugated metal wall, gasping for air. I heard the truck stop at the end of the driveway. The engine idled. Doors opened. I was trapped. The house was dark. No one was home, or they were asleep, and I did not have time to wake them. The shed blocked me from view of the driveway, but if they came down and searched, they would find me in seconds. I looked around desperately and spotted a large propane tank 10 feet away, closer to the house. I crawled to it and pressed myself behind it, making myself as small as possible. I heard footsteps on gravel. 2 people walking down the driveway. They were talking quietly, words I could not make out. They were maybe 30 feet away, 20 feet. The footsteps stopped. One of them said something about checking the house. The other one laughed again, that same terrible laugh. Time seemed to stop. I was certain they were going to find me. Certain this was how I was going to die, in some stranger's yard, killed by people whose faces I had never even seen. Then, from the direction of the road, a third voice called out. Urgent, something about lights. The footsteps on the gravel hesitated, then turned and moved quickly back toward the truck. Doors slammed. The engine revved and the truck pulled away fast, gravel spraying. I waited behind that propane tank, not moving, barely breathing, for what felt like an hour, but my phone later told me was 20 seconds. When I finally dared to look, the truck was gone. I could see tail lights in the distance, moving away down Route 34. I stayed hidden for another full 10 minutes, making sure they were really gone and not coming back. When I finally stood up on shaking legs, I vomited in the grass next to the propane tank. Fear and adrenaline and exhaustion all hitting me at once. I walked to the dark farmhouse and pounded on the door until lights came on inside. An elderly couple answered, understandably terrified by the filthy, wild-eyed man on their porch at 1 in the morning. I told them I needed to call the police, that someone had. Chased me through the cornfield. They let me in and called 911 while the wife made me sit down and brought me water. The police arrived 30 minutes later. I told them everything. They found my car still on the shoulder of Route 34, untouched. They searched the cornfield with flashlights and found tire tracks where the truck had driven into the field, found the trampled corn where multiple people had been walking around, found my footprints and other footprints. But they never found who had chased me. The truck had vanished. The deputy who took my statement told me I was the 4th person in 2 years to report being chased in that area after their car broke down or they stopped for some other reason. None of the other victims got away. 2 were found beaten nearly to death and robbed. 1 was never found at all. The deputy said they suspected it was a group targeting stranded motorists, possibly even sabotaging cars to create victims. But they had never caught anyone. He said I was lucky. I did not feel lucky. I felt like I had looked into something dark and barely escaped. My car was towed to a shop in the nearest town. The mechanic told me my coolant line had been cut cleanly, not worn through or damaged by age. Someone had sabotaged my car. I paid to have it fixed and continued my drive east, but I could not stop shaking for days. That was 5 years ago, and I still cannot drive through rural areas at night without my heart rate spiking. I keep my car meticulously maintained. I never let my gas tank get below half full. And if I see a pickup truck approach slowly on an empty highway, even in broad daylight, I feel that same cold panic. Because I know now that there are people who hunt other people, who use the isolation of cornfields and dark roads to their advantage, and who laugh while they do it. I survived because I ran fast and got lucky. That is all. And knowing how close I came to being one of the ones who did not get away haunts me every single day. When I was 19 years old, I stumbled upon something in a cornfield that I was never meant to see. What started as innocent curiosity during a boring house-sitting job turned into one of the most terrifying nights of my life. And it taught me that some traditions are kept secret for very good reasons. My name is Zoe, and this is what happened when I discovered the Circle People. In the summer of 2020, I agreed to house-sit for a family friend named Mrs. Garrett, who lived about 40 minutes outside of my hometown in southern Indiana. She was going to visit her daughter in Ohio for 2 weeks and needed someone to water the plants, feed the cat, and generally keep an eye on the place. The pay was decent, and I had nothing else going on between college semesters, so I said yes. The house was a modest ranch-style home on the edge of a small farming community, surrounded by fields. Behind the house was a massive cornfield that seemed to stretch on forever, owned by a neighboring farmer who leased the land. The first few days were uneventful and honestly pretty boring. I watched television, read books, played with Mrs. Garrett's ancient tabby cat, and tried not to lose my mind from the isolation. On the fourth day, I decided to explore the property a bit. There was a walking path that ran along the edge of the cornfield, probably used by Mrs. Garrett for her evening walks, and I followed it just to get some exercise and fresh air. The corn was at full height, maybe 8 feet tall, creating dense green walls on my left as I walked. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something odd. There was a gap in the corn, like a pathway leading into the field. Curious, I followed it. The path wound through the corn for maybe 50 feet before opening into a perfectly circular clearing. Someone had removed all the corn plants in a circle roughly 30 feet in diameter, leaving bare dirt. But it was not just an empty circle. Someone had drawn symbols in the dirt with what looked like chalk or paint. Geometric patterns, circles within circles, lines radiating from the center. And arranged around the perimeter of the circle were children's toys. Old ones, weathered by time and exposure. A stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, a wooden doll with a painted face, a set of jacks, a jump rope coiled like a snake, maybe 15 or 20 items total, each placed deliberately at even intervals around the circle's edge. I stood at the edge of this clearing, my phone already out, taking pictures. It was strange and definitely gave me an uneasy feeling, but I was more curious than scared. I figured it was some kind of art project, or maybe a memorial of some sort. I walked around the circle, photographing the symbols and the toys, trying to make sense of the patterns. Then I heard a twig snap behind me, and I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the corn swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. I decided I had seen enough and, meek, followed the path back to the house. That evening, I showed the photos to my friend Bailey, who had grown up in the area. We were video chatting, and I was telling her about my boring house-sitting gig when I remembered the circle. I pulled up the photos and showed them to her. Her face went pale. She leaned closer to her screen, studying the images. And then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her before. Fear mixed with something like reverence. She asked me where exactly I was staying, and when I told her, she closed her eyes and said one word: crap. Bailey proceeded to tell me about what locals called the Circle People. She said it was a group in the area that practiced what they claimed were old harvest traditions, rituals that predated modern farming and had roots in European folk practices brought over by the original settlers. Most people in town knew about them, but did not talk about them much. They were secretive and very protective of their practices. And while they were generally considered harmless, there were stories. Stories about people who interfered with their ceremonies having bad luck. Crops failing, houses burning down. Nothing that could be proven, but enough that people knew to leave them alone. Bailey told me to stay away from that circle, to not go back there, to definitely not touch anything or disturb the setup. I promised her I would not, but I could not stop thinking about it. That night, I kept looking out the back window at the cornfield, wondering what those symbols meant, what those toys represented. Around midnight, I finally went to bed, but I had trouble sleeping. The house was so quiet, and every small sound seemed amplified. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to something that made my blood run cold. Chanting. Low, rhythmic chanting coming from outside. Multiple voices speaking in unison. Words I could not make out, but that had a cadence, like a prayer or incantation. I got out of bed and went to the window that faced the cornfield. In the distance, maybe 200 yards out, where I knew the circle was located, I could see lights. Flickering orange lights like torches or candles. I counted at least 10, maybe more, and I could see figures moving around them, dark shapes against the firelight. The chanting continued, rising and falling in volume, and I realized with a sick feeling that some of those figures were small. Children. There were children out there in that field in the middle of the night, participating in whatever this ceremony was. I should have closed the curtains, gone back to bed, pretended I had not seen anything. That is what a smart person would have done. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording video through the window, zooming in as much as I could on the distant lights and figures. I recorded for maybe 30 seconds, trying to keep my hands steady, trying to capture evidence of what I was witnessing. Then my phone's camera flash went off. I had not realized the flash was on automatic, trying to compensate for the low light. The bright white flash lit up the interior of the room behind me, and consequently, my reflection was visible in the window. For a moment, I just stood there in shock, staring at my phone in horror. Then I looked back toward the field. The chanting had stopped, complete silence, and the figures, all of them, had turned toward the house. I could not see their faces at that distance, but I could see the shift in their body positions, all oriented in my direction now. All of them looking toward the window where I stood. I dropped to the floor below the window line, my heart slamming in my chest. I stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then I heard them. Footsteps outside. Multiple people walking toward the house. Not running, not rushing, just walking with steady, purposeful steps. I crawled to the front door and checked that it was locked. It was. I checked the back door. Locked. I went through the entire house in a crouch, checking every window, every entry point, making sure everything was secure. The footsteps got louder, closer. They were in the backyard now. I called 911, but when the dispatcher answered and asked what my emergency was, I froze. What was I going to say? That people were having a ceremony in a cornfield and I spied on them? That they were walking toward the house? They had not threatened me. They had not tried to break in. I would sound insane. I hung up without saying anything. The footsteps stopped right outside the back door. I could hear breathing. Multiple people standing just on the other side of the door, so close I could hear the slight wheeze of someone's inhale. Then silence. I spent the next 4 hours huddled in the basement with all the lights off and a kitchen knife in my shaking hands, certain they were going to break in, certain something terrible was about to happen. But nothing did. No one tried the doors. No one broke a window. As the sky started to lighten with the approach of dawn, I finally worked up the courage to look outside. The backyard was empty. I went to the window that faced the cornfield and looked out. In the distance, the circle was invisible from this angle, but I knew it was there. Everything looked normal in the early morning light. When full daylight came, I went outside. My legs were weak and I felt nauseous from fear and lack of sleep. But I had to see. I walked around the house looking for evidence that people had been there. I found footprints in the soft dirt near the back door. Many footprints, different sizes including small ones, that could only have been from children. I followed the back path toward the cornfield, toward where the circle had been. When I reached the spot, I found that the path into the field had been covered. Someone had bent the corn stalks back across the entrance, hiding it. I pushed through anyway, forcing my way in, and emerged into the clearing. The circle was gone. Not just cleaned up, but obliterated. The dirt had been raked smooth, erasing all the symbols. The toys were gone. Every trace of what had been there was removed as if it had never existed. Except for one thing. Carved into the dirt in the very center of the circle, in letters 6 inches tall, was a message. Watcher beware. I ran back to the house, packed my things in less than 10 minutes, loaded them into my car, and left. I called Mrs. Garrett from the road and told her I had a family emergency and could not finish the house-sitting job. I gave her the name of another friend who could take over and apologized profusely. She was understanding and told me not to worry about it. I never told her the real reason I left. When I got home, I found that the video I had recorded on my phone was corrupted. The file would not open. The photos I had taken of the circle earlier in the week were fine, but that video from the night of the ceremony was just gone, replaced by a corrupted file that my phone could not read. I still have those photos of the circle on my phone. Sometimes I look at them and try to convince myself it was all some kind of misunderstanding, that I overreacted to a harmless local tradition. But then I remember the message carved in the dirt. Watcher beware. Those words were not a misunderstanding. They were a warning. Mrs. Garrett came home from her trip and never mentioned finding anything strange. My friend who took over the house-sitting job said the rest of the 2 weeks were completely uneventful. Life went on as normal for everyone except me. I moved back to college in the fall and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But I never went back to that area. When Bailey invites me to visit, I always make an excuse. And I never, ever go near cornfields anymore, especially during harvest season, because I know now that there are people who practice traditions in the shadows, rituals that the rest of us are not meant to see. And if you do see them, if you witness what you should not have witnessed, they will make sure you know that you have crossed a line. I got off with a warning. I do not want to know what would have happened if I had pushed further or gone back. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried in the corn. I was 22 years old when I took a summer job that would haunt me for the rest of my life. What I discovered working as a farmhand in eastern Kansas taught me that evil does not always announce itself with violence or threats. Sometimes it hides behind a quiet smile and a firm handshake. And by the time you see the truth, you are already standing on top of graves you did not know existed. My name is Dylan, and I worked for a serial killer without knowing it. The job posting appeared on a bulletin board at the agricultural supply store in Junction City in late May. Farmhand needed for summer season, it read. Room and board provided, competitive wages, experience preferred but not required. I had grown up around farms and needed money before heading back to college in the fall, so I called the number. A man named Patrick answered, his voice calm and measured. He asked a few basic questions about my experience, whether I could operate equipment, whether I had any health issues that would prevent heavy labor. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, and at the end, he told me the job was mine if I wanted it. I said yes. I arrived at the farm on a Tuesday afternoon. The property was about 15 miles outside of town, accessible by a long gravel driveway that wound through fields of young corn, already knee-high in the early summer heat. The house was a simple 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling in places, but structurally sound. Patrick met me on the porch. He was in his mid-50s, lean and weathered from years of outdoor work, with graying hair cut short and hands that were calloused but clean. He shook my hand firmly, showed me to the converted barn where I would be staying, and gave me a brief tour of the operation. He ran a corn and soybean farm on just over 400 acres. Most of the work was mechanized, but he needed help with equipment maintenance, irrigation management, fence repair, and general labor during the growing season. He was polite, but not overly friendly, the kind of employer who respected boundaries and expected the same in return. I liked that. Some people talk your ear off. Patrick let the work speak for itself. The first 3 weeks were exactly what I expected. I woke at dawn, worked until mid-afternoon when the heat became oppressive, took a break, then worked another few hours in the evening when it cooled down. Patrick paid me in cash every Friday, and we ate dinner together most nights, simple meals he cooked himself. He was a decent cook and a quiet companion. We talked about weather, crop prices, equipment breakdowns. He never asked about my personal life, and I did not ask about his. It was a professional arrangement that suited us both. The only odd thing I noticed was how particular he was about one section of the property. The North Field, about 80 acres of corn separated from the main operation by a tree line, was off limits. He told me during my first week that the North Field was on a different planting schedule and was not ready for any kind of maintenance yet. Fair enough. I did not question it. Farmers have their systems, and I was not there to second-guess his methods. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. In my 4th week, I was repairing fence posts on the western boundary when I noticed that the corn in the North Field looked identical to the corn in the main fields. Same height, same color, same stage of growth. It did not make sense that it would be on a different schedule. I mentioned it casually to Patrick that evening over dinner. His face did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. He told me firmly that the North Field was his concern and I should focus on my assigned work. The conversation moved on, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. 2 days later, around 7 in the evening, I was walking back from checking an irrigation pump near the tree line when I saw Patrick. He was walking into the North Field carrying a large duffel bag over his shoulder, the kind of heavy canvas bag people use for camping gear or tools. He did not see me. I watched him disappear into the corn rows, moving with purpose toward the center of the field. It struck me as odd. Why would he need tools out there if the field was not being worked? I dismissed it. Maybe he was checking for pests or setting up monitoring equipment. But the image stuck with me. The following Monday, Patrick drove into town for supplies. He told me he would be gone most of the day and that I should focus on cleaning and organizing the equipment shed. After he left, I stood in the yard for a long time, looking toward the North Field. I knew I should not go out there. I knew it was a violation of trust and potentially my job. But something nagged at me, some instinct I could not name. I walked to the tree line, pushed through the brush, and entered the North Field. The corn was dense and uniform, planted in perfect rows just like everywhere else. I walked toward the center, navigating by the sun, listening for any sound that might indicate I was not alone. After about 10 minutes, I found it. A cleared area, roughly 20 feet in diameter, hidden deep in the corn where it could not be seen from any road or building. The ground had been disturbed. There were 3 distinct mounds of earth, each about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, covered with a thin layer of soil and dead leaves that had been carefully arranged to look natural. But the soil was loose, fresh. My stomach turned. I stood there staring at those mounds, and my brain tried to come up with innocent explanations. Dead livestock, old septic drainage, anything but what I was actually looking at. Then I saw it. Tied to one of the corn stalks at the edge of the clearing was a clear plastic bag. Inside were personal items, a wallet, a cell phone, a set of car keys, a woman's driver's license with a name I did not recognize, but a face that looked young and scared in the photo. I felt like I was going to vomit. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I took 3 photos of the clearing, 2 of the plastic bag, and then I ran. I crashed through the corn as fast as I could move, branches whipping my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I did not stop until I reached my truck parked near the barn. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and tried to think. I could not go to Patrick. If he was responsible for what I had found, confronting him would be suicide. I could not call from the farm phone in case he checked records. I needed to get to town, to call from somewhere public, somewhere safe. I started the truck and drove down the long gravel driveway, forcing myself to go slow, to not raise suspicion if Patrick happened to be coming back and we passed each other on the road. My heart did not stop pounding until I reached the main highway. I drove to the sheriff's office in Junction City and told them everything. The deputy who took my statement looked skeptical at first. But when I showed him the photos on my phone, his expression changed. Within an hour, there were 6 patrol cars heading to the farm. I rode with one of them, sitting in the back seat in silence, watching the fields roll past and wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. We did not imagine it. The police cordoned off the north field and brought in cadaver dogs and excavation equipment. They found remains, 2 bodies buried in shallow graves, both victims who had been reported missing in the past 18 months. A transient laborer from Oklahoma, a hitchhiker passing through Kansas on her way to Colorado. People whose disappearances had been investigated but never solved because there were no leads, no witnesses, no connections. Patrick had chosen his victims carefully. People who would not be missed, who were far from home, who could vanish without raising immediate alarm. Patrick Ellis was arrested that evening when he returned to the farm. He did not resist. He did not deny anything. According to the police, he confessed within 2 hours, providing details about 3 victims, explaining how he had lured them to the property with offers of work or help. How he had killed them and buried them in the field he knew no one would ever search. The case made state news for a few weeks, then faded as these things do. Patrick was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. I left Kansas the day after his arraignment. I could not stay on that property, could not look at those fields without seeing what was buried there. The family who owned the land sold it within 6 months. I heard they had the north field completely excavated and the soil removed, though I do not know if that is true. I do not ever want to go back and find out. What haunts me most is not the discovery itself, though that was terrible enough. What haunts me is the meals we shared, the conversations about weather and crop yields, the polite thank yous when I finished a job well done. I sat across a table from a man who had killed at least 3 people, maybe more, and I saw nothing. No signs, no red flags, no indication that anything was wrong. He was normal. He was kind. He paid me fairly and treated me with respect. And all the while, bodies were decomposing 200 yards from where I slept. I finished my degree and moved to Oregon, as far from the Midwest as I could get. I do not work in agriculture anymore. I cannot. Every time I see a cornfield, I think about what might be hidden in the rows, what secrets the soil might hold. I think about how easy it is for evil to hide in plain sight, how a quiet man with a firm handshake can be a monster, and how close I came to being the 4th body in that clearing. I got out because I was curious, because I asked questions, because I trusted my instincts when something felt wrong. Not everyone is that lucky. And that is what keeps me awake at night, knowing that somewhere, in some field, in some forgotten corner of farmland, there are probably more graves that no one has found yet, more victims of people who seem perfectly normal until the day you dig too deep and discover the truth they have been hiding all along. I spent 6 weeks convinced I was losing my mind, that my paranoia was a symptom of trauma and isolation rather than a genuine threat. I was wrong. My name is Audrey, and this is the story of how I learned to trust my instincts, even when everyone around me insisted I was imagining things. Sometimes what feels like paranoia is actually your brain recognizing danger before your conscious mind can process it. 2 years ago, I was 35 years old and freshly divorced after 8 years of marriage. The split was ugly, drawn out, and left me emotionally exhausted. My therapist suggested I take some time away from the city, somewhere quiet where I could process everything and start rebuilding my sense of self. A colleague mentioned that her aunt had a small farmhouse for rent in rural Kansas, 2 bedrooms, completely furnished, month-to-month lease, utilities included, remarkably cheap. It sounded perfect. I wanted isolation. I wanted peace. I wanted to be somewhere my ex-husband could not find me, could not call me, could not show up unannounced demanding to talk. I signed the lease sight unseen and moved in on a gray Tuesday in early April. The house was exactly what I needed. A modest one-story ranch from the 1960s, freshly painted white with blue trim, sitting on 5 acres at the end of a gravel road. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Behind the house, on 3 sides, stretched a massive cornfield owned by a corporate farming operation. In April, the field was just tilled earth, dark and rich, waiting for planting. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just wind and birds and the occasional distant rumble of farm equipment. I spent the first week unpacking, setting up my home office for remote work, and slowly unwinding. I slept better than I had in months. The corn was planted in mid-April, and by early May the field had transformed into a sea of bright green shoots, maybe 6 inches tall, and growing visibly day by day. I started taking my morning coffee on the back porch, watching the sunrise over the field, feeling something like contentment for the first time since the divorce. But around the 3rd week of May, something shifted. I started feeling watched. It began as a vague unease, the kind of prickling sensation you get when someone is staring at you in a crowded room. I would be sitting on the porch reading, and suddenly I would have the overwhelming urge to look up toward the northeast corner of the field. There was never anything there. Just rows of corn, now knee-high and rustling softly in the breeze. I told myself it was just hypervigilance, a normal response to being alone in an unfamiliar place after years of a controlling marriage. My therapist had warned me that I might experience heightened anxiety during this transition period. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling persisted and intensified. By early June, when the corn was chest-high and forming a proper wall around the property, I could barely spend time outside without feeling like something was observing me. It was always strongest in the evening, around 7:30, right as the sun was getting low. I would step onto the back porch and the sensation would hit me like a physical force. Eyes on me. Something watching from the field, specifically from the northeast corner, always the same spot. I started going outside less. I kept the curtains closed. When I mentioned it casually to my friend Rachel during a phone call, she gently suggested that maybe I was projecting my feelings about my ex onto the environment, that feeling watched was a manifestation of my hypervigilance during the marriage. She recommended I talk to my therapist about it. I did. My therapist suggested the same thing and asked if I wanted to try anxiety medication. I said I would think about it. The rational part of my brain agreed with them. Of course, I was being paranoid. I was a recently divorced woman living alone in the middle of nowhere, still processing years of emotional abuse. My nervous system was in overdrive. The feeling of being watched was psychological, not real. There was nothing in the cornfield. I needed to address my anxiety, not feed into irrational fears. But the primal part of my brain, the part that evolved over millions of years to keep humans alive, was screaming that something was wrong. I tried to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I set up my phone on the back porch one evening to record video of the northeast corner of the field while I stayed inside. I recorded for an hour, then reviewed the footage. Nothing. Just corn swaying in the wind. I felt foolish and a little relieved. See? Just anxiety. Nothing there. 3 days later, I did it again, this time positioning the phone to capture a wider angle. Again, nothing unusual in the footage. I was starting to feel better, more confident that this was indeed a psychological issue I could work through rather than a real external threat. I made an appointment with my doctor to discuss medication options. Then, on a Thursday evening in late June, I decided to confront my fear directly. The corn was now over 7 feet tall, forming dense walls that you could not see through. The feeling of being watched had become so strong that I was essentially hiding in my house every evening, curtains drawn, lights off, trying to be invisible to whatever I thought was out there. This was not sustainable. I needed to prove to myself, once and for all, that there was nothing in that field. At 7:15, right before the usual time when the feeling was strongest, I walked out the back door and marched directly toward the northeast corner of the property. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep walking. I was going to go right up to the edge of that cornfield, look into it, see that there was nothing there, and put this whole ridiculous fear to rest. I made it about 30 feet from the corn when I saw it. A hunting blind, a camouflage ground blind, the kind hunters use to hide while waiting for deer, positioned just inside the first row of corn and angled directly toward my house, specifically toward the back porch and the large windows of my bedroom and bathroom. My legs went weak. I stood there staring at it, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. That had not been there when I moved in. That was not there in April or May. Someone had set that up recently, had positioned it deliberately to watch my house, to watch me. I took a step closer, then another, moving on autopilot even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The blind was occupied recently. There were fresh cigarette butts on the ground outside it, at least 20 of them. Inside the blind, hung on the frame, were photographs, Polaroid pictures of me. Me on the back porch drinking coffee. Me getting my mail from the box at the end of the driveway. Me visible through my bedroom window, getting dressed. There were at least a dozen photos, maybe more. And there was other evidence of long-term occupation. A folding chair, empty water bottles, snack wrappers. Whoever had been using this blind had spent hours there. Days, probably. Watching me. I ran. I sprinted back to the house, my breath coming in gasps, fumbled with my keys, got inside, locked every door and window, and called 911 with hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I told the dispatcher there was someone stalking me, that I had found a blind with photos, that I needed police immediately. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them the blind, showed them the photos, told them about the weeks of feeling watched. They took photographs of everything, collected the Polaroids as evidence, and searched the surrounding area. They did not find anyone, but they found more evidence. Footpaths through the corn leading from a service road on the far side of the field. More cigarette butts. A recent campfire site. Someone had been coming and going regularly, accessing the blind from the road where their vehicle would not be visible from my house. The deputies asked if I had any idea who might be doing this. Ex-boyfriend? Angry ex-husband? I told them about my divorce, gave them my ex-husband's information. They ran his name and found that he had a brother, Thomas, who lived 2 counties over and had a record. Trespassing, stalking, peeping Tom charges. They brought him in for questioning that same night. Thomas confessed within hours. He had been staying with my ex-husband after my ex-husband and I separated. Had heard my ex-husband talking about me, complaining about the divorce, mentioning where I had moved. Thomas had decided, for reasons the police report described as obsessive and delusional, that he needed to watch over me. He had been coming to the property almost every day since mid-May, parking on the service road, walking through the corn, and spending hours in that blind watching my house. Watching me. The photos were his trophies. He had dozens more on his phone. He was arrested and charged with stalking, criminal trespass, and invasion of privacy. My ex-husband claimed he had no idea what his brother was doing, and there was no evidence to prove otherwise. Thomas accepted a plea deal. 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, permanent restraining order. It felt like nothing compared to what he had put me through. But at least he was off the streets. I moved out of that farmhouse 3 days after finding the blind. I could not stay there, could not sleep there, knowing what had been happening just yards from my bedroom window. My friend Rachel apologized profusely for dismissing my concerns, for suggesting it was all in my head. My therapist apologized too. Everyone had been so ready to attribute my fear to trauma and mental health issues that no one had considered the possibility that I was actually in danger. The thing that haunts me most is not what Thomas did, though that is terrible enough. It is the fact that I almost convinced myself I was crazy. I almost went on medication to suppress the very instinct that was trying to protect me. If I had succeeded in medicating away that feeling of being watched, if I had managed to ignore it completely, how much longer would he have escalated? The police found journal entries on his phone detailing his fantasies about entering my house while I slept. I was weeks, maybe days, away from him acting on those fantasies. I live in an apartment complex now. 4th floor, neighbors on all sides, security cameras in the hallways. I have triple locks on my door and a security system. I see a new therapist who specializes in stalking victims. And I have learned, in the hardest way possible, that sometimes paranoia is not paranoia at all. Sometimes it is your subconscious recognizing patterns that your conscious mind has not put together yet. Sometimes that feeling of being watched is your brain's way of screaming at you that you are in danger, and you need to listen to it before it is too late. To this day, I cannot drive past a cornfield without feeling that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. But now, instead of dismissing it or trying to medicate it away, I pay attention. I trust it. Because the alternative, ignoring your instincts because you are afraid of seeming irrational or paranoid, can get you killed. I was lucky. I listened to that voice just in time. Not everyone does. And I think about that every single day, every time I see those tall green walls swaying in the wind, wondering who else might be hiding in the rows, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Trust your instincts, even when everyone tells you it is all in your head, especially then.